This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
What a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. It is, well, technically the final football Friday of the year. It's kind of sad. But you know what? We're still here with you here on 97.3 ESPN. Also streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. You can watch the show, get a little behind-the-scenes look at what we all look like here in the studio. And Kevin McCormick will join us, our Sixers beat reporter for 97.3 ESPN.com at 6:20. You can see him, too. He'll join the stream coming up at 6:20. Get the Sixers and Celtics tonight at 7:30 on 97.3 ESPN. You know, those non-7 p.m. times are usually those national NBA games. So Sixers getting back into the national rotation. So we will talk Sixers coming up with Kevin McCormick. Then, as I mentioned, 609-403-0973 is text board as well. Also, you can drop your comments over here as well on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And I can't proceed throughout the rest of this show without opening up about something specifically about this hiring today. I feel like over the last 24 to 36 hours, we've heard a lot of reaction. And I'm noticing the more people I've heard from and talked to and interacted with, I'm finding the majority of people who didn't like the hire really weren't sure why they didn't like the hire. They just didn't like it. And they really weren't sure why they didn't like it. Part of it was because they didn't know who Nick Sirianni was. Part of it was because maybe they wanted another candidate to be hired. But the majority of the situation when it came to this had nothing to do with actually if Nick Sirianni was a good or bad hire. But the problem when it came down to was people were just unhappy with something. And I think that's just really a problem right now we have as Philadelphia sports fans. You're just not happy. You're frustrated with wearing these masks. We're frustrated going out in public and we can't go do our normal things. We're frustrated with our teams are disappointing us. We're frustrated with Ben Simmons not taking jump shots. We're just frustrated. We're frustrated the Flyers lost the game they should have won last night. We're frustrated that the Phillies still haven't signed JT Realmuto. You're just frustrated. The problem really has nothing to do with Nick Sirianni. The problem is a Philadelphia sports fan base that is frustrated. That's really what your problem is. And I'm just laying it out there to you. You need to keep in mind that what you're doing is you are projecting onto everyone else your frustrations. And I'm not mad at people about that. I don't think it's a horrible thing. I'm not going to sit here and act like, oh, you're stupid because you feel that way. No, I will not be mad at anybody for any of that. But what I will caution you is you have to be patient. You have to let this thing play out. Don't be so hasty to dismiss or like Sirianni. Just because I'm on board with him doesn't mean you have to be. And just because you're not on board with him doesn't mean I have to be. But if you're going to come at me and tell me why you like or dislike the hire, you got to give me a reason. And the reason why I went down this road is because I was thinking about throughout the show all the people who are jumping on the stream here on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook who are watching the show. And I was listening to all the reactions on the text board about Ben Simmons. And I'm finding that a lot of these reactions, a lot of these perspectives, a lot of these people who are unhappy, you don't even know why you're unhappy. You don't even know why you dislike Ben Simmons. Some of the reasoning, like the person who texted in, trade Ben Simmons for a bag of balls. Well, first of all, let's be realistic. You must really need some basketballs if you need a bag of balls. I know the economy is rough right now, but still, good grief. I kid, though. You just don't like Ben Simmons. You just don't like fill in the blank coach. You just don't like fill in the blank whatever it is. And that's irrational. Now, if you're willing to admit you're being irrational, I can work with you. But being irrational for the sake of being irrational, it just doesn't work. At least not for me. It might for you and your friends and a couple other people. But, if your boss comes to you, right, and he says, I need you to give me a reason why we should do this. And your reasoning is, it's stupid, it's dumb, it's idiotic, it's lame. Your boss is going to look at you like, all right, and? Listen, I'm frustrated with Ben Simmons. I'm frustrated with Carson Wentz. I'm frustrated with Jeff Lurie. But I just encourage everybody to try to have a reason for why you're frustrated. Have a reason for why you like or dislike something. So let's dig a little deeper into this Sirianni stuff and this Ben Simmons stuff today. Josh Hennig here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hennig. Kevin McCormick, our 76ers beat reporter, joins us coming up at 6:20 here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, don't forget the text board is open at 609-403-0973. You can drop your comments in here on the stream as you watch on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You heard it earlier here on 97.3 ESPN. Adam Kaplan broke down for you that this was a process the Eagles went through. Everyone who covers the Eagles, who's an honest arbiter of information, is going to tell you that Nick Sirianni's name didn't come out of nowhere. So now that we know that name just didn't come out of nowhere, it wasn't just coming out of the blue, what do we do now? Well, now we look ahead to how does this impact Carson Wentz? What kind of staff is he going to bring in? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's Nick Sirianni, Deuce Staley, or Hunter Brody, who's the Eagles head coach. If you don't have a good staff, it's not going to matter. Because one of the problems with the Eagles in the past couple of years was who exactly was on the staff of Doug Peterson. Nobody in their right mind thought Mike Rowe was a great candidate. Nobody in their right mind thought that fill in the blank from Greg Lewis to Corey Unlin to all these random guys who have been in this organization over the last few years were great candidates. Outside of Frank Reich, Jim Schwartz, and John DeFilippo, the rest of the coaching staff, let's be realistic, it was flawed. And the constant turnover was a problem. So whoever Nick Sirianni brings with him, they had to be solid candidates. They have to be people who are going to have staying power, and they got to be people who are actually going to be able to get the job done. Because Carson Wentz, whether you want to believe the Jeff McClain article or not, he had issues this year. I don't need an article or a report to tell me that. It was obvious that him and Doug Peterson had a uncomfortable, at least, relationship because they almost never talked to each other during the game. So that's something Sirianni has to work on. You look at the situation when it came to the overall of the offense. People said the offense was vanilla, right? Well, Sirianni's got to improve on that. Get rid of the predictability. You look at the overall situation with the Eagles, with Wentz, with the offense, with the injuries. There were a lot more problems with this team than just the head coach. So whoever comes in here with Sirianni is actually almost more important than Nick Sirianni himself. And I've heard multiple reports of people say now that part of the reason why Sirianni was in Frank Reich's staff in Indianapolis was because Frank Reich brought him in to coach the coaches on the offensive side of the ball. And I distinctly remember Jeff Lurie saying about a week and a half ago that he wanted a coach of coaches. And for whatever reason, the other 10 people who interviewed for this job didn't fit the criteria what the Eagles wanted. And I'm okay with that. I'm accepting it. I'm willing to see what happens. But if Nick Sirianni brings along another Press Taylor and another Mike Rowe and another fill-in-the-blank random dude who's been on the Eagles coaching staff in the last 5 years, Nick Sirianni's time in Philadelphia will be short-lived. I guarantee you that much. Again, the text board is open at 609-403-0973. You also can comment on the stream, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We are streaming here on 97.3 ESPN Sports Bash with Mike Gill, as well as myself, Game Night with Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Now, all day long, Mike Gill and Hunter Brody got a ton of reaction from you guys out there about the Ben Simmons trade stuff. And again, I'm going to address you guys who are being completely ridiculous. All of you people who are saying trade Ben Simmons for a bag of balls, all you people who are sitting there saying just get rid of Ben Simmons, I hate him, I hate him, I hate him. You don't even know what you hate. You just don't like him. That's what it really is. You're projecting your dissatisfaction with something else in life on Ben Simmons. That's what it really comes down to, all right? Let's get really deep and figure this out, all right? The problem with Ben Simmons is not his shooting. The problem with Ben Simmons isn't his scoring. The problem with Ben Simmons is that he was a number 1 overall pick. The problem with Ben Simmons is that when you're drafted number 1, we are expecting you to be something amazing, something that we never have seen before. We are expecting you to be incredible, groundbreaking, whatever you want to call it. But when you go back and look at the 2016 NBA draft, at the end of the day, nobody in that draft who was among the lottery picks was going to do that for you. So Ben Simmons was the best player in a mediocre draft. If you have Brandon Ingram here right now instead of Ben Simmons, I don't know if you're winning 50 games a year before Doc Rivers got here. If it's Jaylen Brown, same thing. Because I think the Celtics did an incredible job at developing him from a raw talent into a bona fide all-star caliber player. If you would have drafted Buddy Hield, Jamal Murray, you would have drafted Domantas Sabonis. If you would have drafted, go down the list, Karis LeVert was 20th overall. You go down the list, Pascal Siakam, 27. It took him a couple of years to develop, by the way. Whoever you want to pick off of that list, it's not like any of those guys are going to be drastically and dramatically better than Ben Simmons is right now. So really, the only problem with Ben Simmons has nothing to do with anything except that the expectations were not met. You know, Adam Kaplan made a comment earlier in Football at 4. He mentioned about the fact that, you know, when people interview for jobs, there is a moment where you realize that the actor fits the role, okay? And he used Seinfeld. I'm not going to use Seinfeld. I'm going to use something I'm more familiar with, which is comic book and action movies. If you've ever seen a superhero movie, there is a casting process that goes through numerous people. And many times, if the person doesn't fit the suit, they will not get the job. There's a lot of, you know, for example, people who try out for different jobs and it doesn't work out. And just like Nick Sirianni fit in with what the Eagles wanted, on the flip side, Ben Simmons doesn't fit in with what people wanted. And that's really what the problem is. Ben Simmons didn't fit what people wanted or expected him to be. And when you don't fit what people expect or want you to be, no matter what, you're never going to be good enough for them. That's what really the issue is. Now, to me, if you want to get on Ben Simmons about anything, I got two problems with Ben Simmons, and neither one of them have to do with shooting. Neither one of them have to do with his three-point shooting. Because guess what? I don't care. I really don't. Because if Ben Simmons was just a better basketball player, I would be okay with him. To me, if Ben Simmons would stop turning the basketball over, football in the brain, turning the basketball over constantly. He had a 3-game stretch where he averaged 6 turnovers a game. He also had 11 assists in those games. To me, that's disgusting. That means you are negating the majority of your assists by turning the ball over. That's a huge problem. I don't like it when a player of Ben Simmons' caliber makes mistakes. And then I'm supposed to be told he's supposed to be this high basketball IQ. That's frustrating. I don't like that. You know, when I'm watching the Flyers game last night and they sit there, nobody's guarding Coyle, and he goes in for a wide open shot on the net, I get angry because I'm being told that these guys on the ice are supposed to be know better, smarter, understand what to do. Well, I look over at Ben Simmons and I'm being told he should know better. Ben Simmons has to be among the 3 most frustrating athletes in the city. But just remember, he's not worth a bag of basketballs. He's worth a lot more than that. He is an all-star. He is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He is a phenomenal talent. But as we have here on the Messenger on Facebook, Jamie's watching the show over on 97.3 on Facebook. Jamie says, all the experts were telling us that Ben Simmons was generational, a transcendent talent. That's the problem. The expectations were set sky high. And we're now learning that Ben Simmons may never live up to those expectations. You're right, Jamie. Everybody told us one thing, we got something else. It's like if you go to your friend's town who moved away, another part of the country, they say, we're going to get the best pizza in town. You go and get the pizza. Pizza's not as good as you thought. It's good. It's not great. It's okay. It's not phenomenal. Maybe the dough is maybe not as crisp as you would like. Maybe the cheese is not as melted as you would like on top of it. Maybe the pepperoni is a little stiff around the edges. It's not as delectable as you would like. But your friend told you the best pizza in town. Your friend told you that this pizza is generational and transcendent. And you find out that it's basically somebody went to the local supermarket, bought some frozen pizza, stuck it in the oven, and is serving it to you at the restaurant. Shout out to Jamie chiming in while watching on Facebook. You can also watch on YouTube and Twitter. The show 973 ESPN. We will check your text messages a little bit later at 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation here on 97.3 ESPN. But coming up next, we will be joined by 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers beat writer Kevin McCormick right here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, we'll get back to your text in just a bit at 609-403-0973. Also, you can your comments on the stream. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube is where you can jump on the streams here on 97.3's ESPN social media platforms. But joining us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, as promised, he is Kevin McCormick, 97.3 ESPN.com. Sixers beat writer joins us as all guests on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline live here on the stream. Kevin, how's it going?
Josh, I'm doing good. I wouldn't say I'm as fired up as you just were in that last segment, but I'm good. I'm good.
Well, listen, let's get into it, okay? I'll try to rub off some of my fire on you. How about that? As we get ready for this game. So, because here's the thing, I don't hate Ben Simmons like some people do, but I hate the irrational hate of Ben Simmons. Okay, I don't like this idea that just because Ben is not Steph Curry, that he's a bum. To me, and I think Jamie on Facebook brought this up as well. Okay, Jamie brought up the comment, I'll pop it up here on the stream, that, listen, there was an expectation placed on Ben Simmons, okay? He was a number 1 overall pick. We were told he was generational. He was transcendent. And we're finding out now that he's not generational and transcendent. He's a really, really good basketball player. And to me, until people are willing to accept that the movie trailer didn't match the actual movie doesn't mean the movie stinks. Doesn't mean that Ben Simmons is worth a bag of basketballs, Kevin.
There's a lot to unpack from that. Well, first things first, in terms of that movie reference, I mean, the movie isn't over. To be realistic, we're still, barely a quarter of the way in. Ben Simmons is only 24 years old. The whole generational transcendent thing, I wouldn't even say that goes towards the player. I think that just goes towards how people analyze draft classes, and you can make the debate of if those words get thrown around too often, because then you get put in situations like this. I mean, there have been plenty of number 1 picks in the past who have, had that kind of label thrown on them and didn't live up to it. I mean, look at a guy like Andrew Wiggins. How much has he bounced around? The hype was real with him when he was getting ready to enter the draft and things. But the slander of Ben Simmons, I just don't get it. I agree he's in a bit of a slump right now. The scoring numbers are down. And, the real issues with me are his turnovers and his foul trouble. Because when you look at a guy like Ben Simmons, as much as you can say he makes passing contagious on the floor, when he's turning over the ball and such, it doesn't look good when the guy who's orchestrating the offense is also the one giving the ball away. And when he gets put in foul trouble, you see him get put in tough spots like Wednesday night, where he picked up his 5th foul with, about 3 minutes to go in the 3rd quarter, and it limited how much impact he could have in the 4th quarter. So those 2 areas, I would say, are where Simmons is really struggling. But I don't get the hate either. It's just, the Sixers are winning games. They've been very dominant to start this season. And, although Simmons hasn't looked, phenomenal in any sort of the word, Joel Embiid's an MVP candidate. Seth Curry's having a career year. Tobias Harris is playing phenomenal. I mean, at some point, like, some player has to take a step back, and it makes the most sense that it's Simmons because he's the one orchestrating all this, and he wants to be that pass-first guy to begin with.
Now, you mentioned how he's played recently. My biggest problem with him recently, Kevin, is actually not as much the scoring, it's the turnovers. The turnovers are driving me nuts. He went through a 3-game stretch before the last game, the last 3 games before the Celtics game. He was averaging 6 turnovers a game and 11 assists a game. So it's like, oh, great, he's getting double-digit assists. He's getting triple-doubles almost every night. But then he's turning the ball over 6 times. And I don't understand how a guy who's supposed to be this high basketball IQ, he's got Sam Cassell working with him before every practice. See, every time you, Blevins, and Hudrick have been to a game, every video has Sam Cassell working with Ben Simmons. I don't know if Sam Cassell has had this many turnovers in a stretch of games as Ben Simmons has. So either Ben Simmons is just in a fog right now, or he doesn't get the fact that he's hurting this team. And I don't know what to make of that, Kevin.
It's tough. I think there's a lot of different factors. One, I mean, it definitely could, the whole him being in a fog, it could be a thing. I mean, they're in a whole new offensive set. And, with that comes a little bit of growing pains. And we've seen that at times with Simmons' play. But in reality, it's so tough to say. Sometimes he just puts himself in really frustrating spots. Like when you see him attack the paint and he picks up his dribble way too soon, and then he finds himself up in the air with nowhere to go, and he's forced to just throw the ball somewhere. So at those times, it can be frustrating. But other times, I mean, when he's getting called for bogus offensive fouls, like we saw the 2 he got on Wednesday night, those rack up as well. But I agree, there are some frustrating points to where his turnovers are very puzzling still, in year 4. At this point, we still shouldn't see the regular staple play of Ben Simmons attacking the lane, picking up his dribble too soon, and just jumping in the air and throwing the ball and hoping something works.
Yeah, I can't stand that either. Kevin McCormick joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline here on 97.3 ESP. You can follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973. Check out his preview for the Sixers Celtics game at 973ESPN.com and the 973 ESPN mobile app. You can watch me and Kevin have our conversation on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at 973 ESPN. Kevin, one more thing on Ben Simmons before we move on to the rest of the team. I don't know what Ben Simmons' potential is. And I don't think anybody with a modicum of basketball knowledge really knows what his potential is. But if this is what Ben Simmons is, so I'm just going to put out a what if. If this is what Ben Simmons is, he's a guy who can get you triple doubles. He's a guy who gets rebounds, assists, steals, plays defense, not a great scorer, mediocre to below average free throw shooter. Is that good enough for this Sixers team to eventually win a championship?
With what we've seen so far from this team when fully healthy, I think there is a case that he still can be a vital piece. Because for starters, when you look at that Brooklyn team, you're going to need a versatile defender and you're going to need a great one at that. So to say that the Sixers could still get past Brooklyn without the defense that Ben Simmons would bring if they were to match up just isn't true. Same thing with Milwaukee. You're going to need somebody to slow down Giannis. But in terms of what he can be, I've said this a lot to a couple of different people, but I think there's a real path to Ben Simmons becoming the rich man's version of Draymond Green and what he was for the Golden State Warriors. Now, people might not like that because, the whole glamour of a number one pick, and Draymond was more of like the glue guy and didn't really, have the pretty stats like Stephen Clay did, but he's going to be that Swiss Army knife guy on the floor who's going to give you a little bit of everything. He's going to play strong defense. He's going to play hard. He's going to lead by example. He's going to do those little things that affect winning but don't always show up on the stat sheet.
And now let's dig that deeper a little bit. Let's use that Warriors analogy a little bit. So if Ben is Draymond Green, then who are the other two? Like who are the other two guys that are going to fill that role? I mean, I'm assuming that Embiid is kind of the Steph Curry, the transcendent, wildly phenomenal player that everybody loves, right? So the analogy is, if Ben Simmons is Draymond Green and Joel is Steph Curry, the MVP candidate, then we need Tobias Harris to be Klay Thompson. So can he be a Klay Thompson-esque player?
From what we've seen so far, I think that he can be. I mean, so far he's been shooting the ball great. I tweeted this out a couple of days ago. If the season were to end right now, Tobias Harris would end 0.3% shy of a 50-40-90 season, which is phenomenal. I mean, it's been a night and day difference from the Tobias we've seen in the past in the Sixers uniform to now. So although, he won't be that phenomenal, player kind of like what Klay was there, he can be, the real Robin to Embiid's Batman on offense. And we've seen it in a lot of games this year where Joel Embiid's really been carrying the load and leading a great example. But Tobias Harris has been right there with him, putting up a quiet 20 points every night, handful of rebounds, handful of assists, and has improved on the defensive end as well. So in terms of being that two-way kind of star player near an all-star level who, can be that reliable player on offense who can score on all three levels and kind of be a nice compliment to Embiid on the floor and what he brings, I think that Tobias Harris could be that here.
Kevin, let's get to the game tonight. Your full preview's up at 97.3ESPN.com for tonight's game. And it looks like Seth Curry will be back in action. How much would you expect that to change what we see on the court? Because let's be realistic. It wasn't just missing Seth Curry. There was a stretch there you missed almost everybody, right? And Tyrese Maxey got all that run. But then as guys have been coming back into the lineup, now everyone's having to readjust to playing time. You readjust to getting back to playing together. So how does Seth Curry help this team? But what are some of the growing pains you might go through as well?
The major growing pains, I think, will just be seeing these guys get reacclimated together. I mean, before everything, the roster became depleted, they had a very small sample size of being able to play together, and there were still growing pains then. So now you're kind of back to square one, getting these guys all back together. But I think it's brought some positives in terms of we've gotten to see what Tyrese Maxey can do with an extended role. Now you get to see him slide back to the bench. The Sixers get to show the deep team that they looked like prior to, being struck with health and safety protocols. So although there will be some growing pains at times, I think it's going to take a couple games to get acclimated, mainly because we don't know how much Seth Curry is going to play tonight. Doc said he's going to monitor it, but there's going to be no set number. So I don't think we'll see a lot of him, but, it'll be just kind of that piecing it back together. You got to walk before you run kind of thing of getting this offense to where it looked 2 weeks ago where, they were dominant on both sides of the floor and really just taking care of teams.
When you also look at this game today, obviously it's a big rivalry. The Celtics are a huge rival for the 76ers. It goes back before you and I were born and most listeners were even born. I mean, you're going back to the 60s here at this point. So when you look at this organization and this matchup tonight, what do you expect from round 2 with the Celtics, considering the fact that, let's be realistic, they didn't have Tatum in the first game. We know that Brad Stevens is a guy who does make adjustments. What can we expect from the Celtics tonight?
I think they try more things to slow down Embiid. Brad Stevens tried to pull a couple different rabbits out of the hat at the game. He tried to go straight up with Tristan Thompson at times. They zoned up for a little bit to bring doubles or even triples of sorts. But I think in this game, we see Brad Stevens force the Sixers to beat him and the Celtics without Joel Embiid. They're going to do everything in their power to slow him down and make the supporting cast take care of business. So I think Joel Embiid sees a lot more double teams, and they'll try to force him to be more of a passer in terms of more being that dominant scorer that he was in game 1.
Now, you mentioned Embiid being the dominant scorer. I know a lot of people are trying to talk about him as a legitimate MVP candidate. Now, the NBA's only been around for a month at this point. So, making grandiose and projective judgments on anybody at this point is ridiculous. But we can't ignore what Joel Embiid has done. There are games that he looks like he's the best player on the planet, and he's doing it more often than he has in the past. How impressed have you been with Joel Embiid, and do you think he can keep this up for 80% of the season?
I've been extremely impressed with how he's played so far. Like you said, there have been multiple games this season where he's looked leaps and bounds better than anybody plays on the floor with him. There's yet to be a center matchup that has even attempted to slow him down. So he's been great on that end. In terms of how long he can keep it up, I think it's still tough to say with how early on in the year we are, but he's looked great physically so far. He's talked about, working on his health and his nutrition better. So he hasn't missed as much in the past, like this season, as we've seen in the past. If it stays up, who knows? I think it'll all depend on where the Sixers are at closer to playoff time in terms of how they want to manage him at that point. But from the way he's played so far, and we've seen him dominate on the back end of back-to-backs, we've seen these 3 games in 4-day stretches, and it hasn't really affected him much. So seeing the small sample size that we've seen right now, I think there is a chance that Embiid carries this throughout a whole season.
Can Joel Embiid, though, be the MVP? We haven't seen a big man win that award in a very long time. It's basically, you could argue the last big man to win the award was Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki. So usually it's a guard-driven league. It's a perimeter player-driven league. Does Joel Embiid have the cachet to get the votes? Because you remember the whole fiasco when he was supposed to maybe get Rookie of the Year. He only played 27 games, blah, blah, blah. Do people have that in the back of their mind? Do voters remember that whole fiasco? Do people really treat Joel Embiid like a bona fide top 10 player in this league, like an MVP is supposed to be?
I think there's a chance, and I think what you just said is the main reason why he could win it. When you look at the MVP award in the past, everyone always says it's narrative-driven. It's always about the narrative and the story. And like you just said, we haven't seen a big man win it since Nowitzki, since Duncan. So I think if Joel Embiid keeps up this kind of pace and he's dominating at this level and on the way he is, the narrative could be the return of the dominant big man. And, we've been waiting for this as the league's gone smaller, that this transcendent center has come back and really brought back things like post play, seeing that old school type of style. And if there was ever a year to win it, it'd be now. I think with Giannis winning 2 in a row, I think he's going to have voter fatigue now. So I think it's going to open up a window for somebody else to really come in and win it. Luka was my guy at the beginning of the season to be able to kind of, dethrone Giannis, and his narrative would be, passing the torch. It's Luka's NBA now. But seeing the way Embiid is playing, and it can bring on the narrative of the return of the big man, and you have this guy in Joel Embiid who's leading the forefront for the Sixers, who are currently at the top of the Eastern Conference. And if they stay there, I think he'll have a very good case. He'll have a very good narrative, and the way he's playing now, he'll have the stats. So it'll all be there. Things will have to fall into place, but it is a reality.
Yeah, it was 13 years ago. Dirk won the award. 6-7, 03-04, Kevin Garnett, and then Duncan went back-to-back years. So it's been a while since a guy who you would look at that height and that size win the award. And, even Dirk, back then, he was known as a perimeter player, but he still did the back down the post. He still got the rebounds. He wasn't purely a perimeter guy like a LeBron or a Kevin Garnett or a Giannis is. You mentioned Giannis and the voter fatigue. Do you think there's a bit of fatigue with the Bucks in general? Do you think that, people are looking at the Eastern Conference, people are jumping on the Nets bandwagon, they're jumping on the Sixers wagon, jumping on the Heat wagon, partly because they're tired of the Bucks?
I would feel part of it is similar to what we've seen in LeBron in the past of he was elite for so long that he almost took himself out of the MVP conversation every year just because of expectation. Everyone expected LeBron to be phenomenal just because of that's who he is. And we've seen in recent years, the Bucks have always been a stellar regular season team, but have, kind of burnt out in the playoffs. So I think part of it is just everyone expects the Bucks to be a regular season team just because that's what they've been. And since there hasn't been much change in recent years, it becomes mundane seeing them dominate in the regular season to just sputter out in the postseason.
He's Kevin McCormick. You can follow him on Twitter at KevinMC973 for all your Sixers and NBA coverage. Check out his preview for the Sixers Celtics game tonight over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, Kevin covers the Sixers for us. You can catch all of his work over there on the website and on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. As all guests, he jumped on here on the Boardwalk Honda hotline and on the stream here. So, Kevin, good to see you. I see you have a Reese Hoskins jersey over your shoulder. So I'm assuming that with pitchers and catchers less than a month away from reporting, you're one of those people who's just screaming, sign JT already, right?
Absolutely. I mean, as of right now, it's 25 days till pitchers and Andrew Knapp show up. So
he's even got the number down. Look at
that. Yeah, definitely. Sign JT. Absolutely. You can't see it, but his jersey is right next to the Harper one that's over my shoulder.
All right, really quick. What's more frustrating for a Philadelphia fan right now? Carson Wentz, Ben Simmons, or JT Realmuto extension not signed?
That's tough. If I had to pick, I think I'd have to go with Ben Simmons just because they're playing right now. And it's just when you look at Ben Simmons, he has all the tools to be the phenomenal and transcendent athlete. And just sometimes we still see those bone scratching plays like when he's driving to the lane to jump in the air and spin and pass to somebody. So if I had to vote right now, I'd say Ben Simmons.
All right, there you go. Kevin McCormick, his 2 cents on the Philadelphia sports scene. Again, follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973. Kevin, appreciate you jumping on and enjoy the game tonight.
Anytime, Josh. Take care.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, Game Night being brought to you by my friends over at weightliftinghq.com. Use code RADIO10 and check out for 10% off your entire order. Benches, squat racks, kettlebells, dumbbells, cardio and fitness machines, whatever you need, weightliftinghq.com is there to help you reach your health and fitness goals. Of course, they are located right here in South Jersey, so they will come, not just deliver the equipment to your house, but get you set up with the equipment. Because let me tell you something, one of the biggest pains in the rear is having to set up weight and health and fitness equipment yourself. You got all the bolts and the screws, and you don't know which one goes where, and everything's got a diagram, and it turns into a 6-hour project. It's a mess. It's no fun. You got to go to the hardware store like Bros does and go get a special wrench just for that one part of the machine because it didn't come with the equipment. Now, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff with weightliftinghq.com. They will deliver it right to your home. Use the code RADIO10 and check out for 10% off your entire order. That's weightliftinghq.com, code RADIO10 at checkout for 10% off the entire order for my friends over at weightliftinghq.com. We'll get back to your text next at 609-403-0973 and your comments on the web stream. Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter is where you can watch the show and get in on the action as well. So you got the Facebook, you got the social media platforms. We got you covered all the bases here on 97.3 ESPN FM. I'm Josh Hennig, hanging out with you for the one more segment coming up as we lead you up to Sixers basketball tonight, 7:30, right here on 97.3 ESPN.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get to your text in just a bit at 609-403-0973. Plus, don't forget you can comment on the stream as you watch on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Of course, Game Night also being brought to my friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. I'll give you my FanDuel picks in just a bit, but don't forget, UFC 257 is this weekend, and I am so pumped for the return of Conor McGregor for his rematch with Dustin Poirier. Can McGregor win by first round TKO again, or does Poirier get his revenge tomorrow night? Well, guess what? You can make those bets on FanDuel Sportsbook with so many different ways to get in on the action right now. When you open a FanDuel Sportsbook account and use my promo code Hennig, new users can unlock 25-1 odds on either fighter to win. That means you can turn $5 into $125. I bet all the big fights on FanDuel Sportsbook, and so can you. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. Use my promo code Hennig to unlock 25-1 odds on McGregor versus Poirier. That's promo code HENNIG on FanDuel Sportsbook. Must be 21 or to play. Must be present in NJ or PA. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Yes, I will have a couple picks for the UFC fight card in just a bit. But first, as I promised, your comments and thoughts who are listening out there. We'll get to the text board first at 609-403-0973. Texter says that Ben Simmons was selected 7th or 8th. We would not be complaining about him. You're 100% correct. The problem with Ben Simmons, as I said earlier, is nothing to do with anything except for the fact he was drafted number 1 overall. If he was a 10th overall pick, nobody would complain half as much as they do. But because the expectations have not been met, because the movie trailer made the movie look like an Academy Award winner, and instead you got a solid to good movie, you're disappointed. You feel let down. Another text at 609-403-0973 says, Ben Simmons is a bigger version of Andre Iguodala. Well, listen, Iguodala won an NBA Finals MVP award, but he did it as the 3rd or 4th best player on the team. So if that's what Ben Simmons is, that's a whole nother set of problems. Listen, I think Ben has more skill as a ball handler, but the turnovers just drive me nuts. He's got to be smarter out there on the basketball court with the ball in his hands. If you're asking him to bring the ball up the court, he can't, as Kevin mentioned earlier, do the whole jump in the air, get stuck, and then try to throw the ball somewhere. It's just not good. Not good at all. Another text at 609-403-0973 says, you're correct. The expectations of Ben as fans, we like a diamond in the rough more. Most of the time, high expectations of athletes in Philadelphia get criticized for what they can't do, more what they can do. That's Dan in EHT. Dan, you're 100% right. You're dealing with a situation where there's so many times when you look at the athletes. Carson Wentz, 2nd overall pick. Ben Simmons, 1st overall pick. Realistically, unless your name is Allen Iverson, has anybody really lived up to expectations of being a top pick for this organization, the organizations in this city? It almost never happens. Very rarely do you get a player who lives up to expectations. And I think Ben Simmons, the biggest problem with him, as I said, has nothing to do except for the fact that he was the number 1 overall pick, and he is not a number 1 overall pick. By the way, shout out to, we got Jeff watching over here on the YouTube feed. Shout out to Jeff. Thanks for chiming in to the broadcast as you're watching. Also, shout out to Jamie, who chimed in earlier in the show on Facebook. His comments on Ben Simmons a little bit earlier, that Ben Simmons is the generational and transcendent talent what the experts told us, and that Ben hasn't lived up to those expectations. You're 100% right, Jamie. Thanks to you guys for chiming in on the feed there. Thanks to all the text messages who came in throughout the show. Before we get out of here, I promised I would give you my FanDuel Sportsbook picks for the night. First of all, when it comes to the Sportsbook picks, one NBA game I'm going with Nets versus Cavs over 223. So if you don't think the Nets can play defense, guess what? No Durant tonight. So there's going to be nobody playing defense. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be a points just extravaganza. So Colin Sexton, Darius Garland versus James Harden and Kyrie Irving. probably going to be like 130 to 120 kind of game. So give me the over 223 in that game. Also, UFC picks. Little betting opportunities for you guys to make a little bit. You know, I'm big on the value. McGregor Poirier over 2.5 rounds. There's a lot of value on that. And the reason why I say you got to look at that, Poirier is not the same fighter that McGregor fought the first time around. Poirier has been through the wars. Dustin is a very, very dangerous fighter. And I think McGregor knows that. I think McGregor is not going to be irrational. This is not Donald Cowboy Cerrone, a guy who's past his prime. This is a legitimate threat. And Conor does not want to get tagged. Conor is a smart fighter. He may be braggadocious. He may be egotistical. And he's probably going to win this fight. But he is not going to let Dustin catch him. So this might be a bit of a filling out process. I wouldn't be surprised if this goes 3 rounds. So I'm going to say over 2.5 rounds. Also in the co-main event, Dan Hooker versus Michael Chandler. Give me Chandler the plus 116 underdog. Also plus 260 by decision. Chandler has a lot of fights go to decision. Look at Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker is a guy who got exposed a little by Dustin Poirier by the changing the levels. Chandler has made a career out of changing levels, and his only losses are to phenomenal athletes or perfect game plans. Eddie Alvarez, perfect game plan. Will Brooks, phenomenal freak athlete. That's why they beat him. Also, on the undercard, the prelims, Antonio Carlos Jr., plus 108 underdog, also plus 380 submission win. He is a submission specialist. Brad Tavares is way past his prime. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night. I'll catch you tomorrow on Sports Bash Saturday.